Well, hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now this video that I'm going to put up on the tube is another build video, and I apologize for not having done more this year, despite the fact that I built about 6 or 7 models this year. But then having said that, I may well retrospectively put one up on there later. But anyway, going back to this one. This one's about a new model called the SoarcerEee. Now, this is a model that I've designed, but it's been inspired by the David Hughes slope soarer called the Sorcerer, which I built a few weeks ago and converted it to electric for flat field flying. Was quite pleased with the performance, but felt that it sounds terrible, I could improve it. So anyway, I completely, I won't say redesigned, but made a new design on the similar vein as the Sorcerer, hence the reason why I've a nod to its pedigree based on the fact that it's SoarcerEee. So the differences are that I've extended the wing by another 8 inches, 200 millimeters, so it's now 60-inch wingspan, 1.5 meters. The fuselage has been lengthened and slimmed considerably from the Sorcerer, and the tail design is different as well. It still has the same running gear, very cheap 22 by 12, I think it's 1400 kV motor and 30 amp ESC, which gives it a sprightly performance. And if you look at my previous videos of the Sorcerer, and indeed the first version of the SoarcerEee, you'll see that the performance isn't lacking with that powertrain. Anyway, with this new design, I approached one of my clubs about 3 weeks ago and suggested that we have a one design build and competition next year, expecting about a dozen people to put their hands up. Cut a long story short, over 20 have now said they want one of these, and I fully expect that to go up to probably 25, which won't be bad at all. So as I say, it will be a winter build, and with a view to having some fun competitions with the model next year. And it'd be great to see 20 of these up in the air at any one moment in time. It'd be mayhem, but it'd be great to see. So this series of videos is about the SoarcerEee, about the build right the way from the start, which is the kit that I've produced on my laser cutter, going through all the basics of the build. And I mean basics of the build because some of the club members have never built off a plan before. So this will be a first for them for balsa bashing. So this series of videos, however many it may be, is all about that. So if you like this, please settle down, have a cup of tea, cup of coffee, or something strong if you like, and join me walking through the build of the SoarcerEee. So let's go over to the bench and have a look to see what we've got. Right, so let's have a look at the individual parts in more detail. So first of all, we got here, fairly obvious really, this is the tailplane. This is the angle template for the root rib. There's the rudder, and that's the battery hatch, the front of the fuselage, and a cutout piece here that's glued to the fuselage, and that's the removable piece. By the way, these slots in here will be filled with hardwood strip which you're supplied with. Moving on, here we've got 2 pieces here and here, which are the doublers that go inside the fuselage for the wing seating. This piece here is the underside of the fuselage sides, and on the sheet above as well. So there and there. And then we've got some ribs, but these ribs have got a dotted cutout. Now these ribs here, there are 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're the root ribs and the one out from the root. So call them R2, these ones here. They're in slightly thicker material, and you'll see why when I start building the wing. Here we've got an elevator half. Just move this strip wood out of the way. This is the core for the fin, and the fin is actually a sandwich of the core material and then two 1/16 of an inch 1.5mm outer layers, which are on the another sheet, in fact up here, but I'll come to that in a moment. Moving on to the next sheet here, again elevator half, two ribs. Now this sheet here of 1/16, you'll see a lot of these rectangular pieces here and also in this one here. These are the cap strips, and they're cut to a length of about 120mm. You will need to trim these to suit the ribs as you build the model. These pieces on the end are the sheeting for the center section of the wing. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those, because you'll need to join the two together. Once again, the detail you'll see as the build. Here are the ribs here, and then we go to the last sheet of 1/16 here, and you'll see all of these rectangles. These are the shear webs, all cut for you, full depth. You don't have to worry about trimming them to size, they are to size. And I said earlier, they're the outer layers for the fin. And then finally you've got 55mm wide strips of 1/16 or 1.5mm balsa for the upper and lower covering for the D box, and then you've got 20mm lengths here, which are the upper and lower trailing edge sheeting. And then the offcuts of balsa here are for the covering of the fuselage top behind the wing. You've also got a nice bit here as well, just in case you make a mistake and may have to cut a rib out or something like that. Now that's the sheet balsa. On top of that you will be getting strip balsa for the upper and lower spars. You'll also get the 6mm ply dihedral brace, and obviously I'm not showing it here, but there are ply parts for the formers for the fuselage as well. Okay, so bearing that, or with that in mind, let's go over to the building board and see how to set that up for the build. Over on the building board now, and I've laid out a sheet of parchment paper. You can use any paper, but you're going to build on top of this, so you don't want to stick to it. And on this paper you're going to draw a horizontal line and a vertical line. The horizontal line represents the spar position, and this vertical line here is the root rib. Make sure that they're perpendicular. When you've done that, then draw another line parallel to the first one, 135mm back. That represents the trailing edge of the trailing edge sheet, which you'll pin onto the board. And the next line you need to draw is another one parallel to the root rib, and that's the next rib out, and that's 32mm. 32mm because the fuselage is 64mm roughly overall, so 32mm is halfway, and that will take this rib, so it's positioned in the wing, and when it's mounted on the fuselage, that'll be positioned over the fuselage side. Then every other rib is 75mm spacing from that rib, and you don't need to worry about measuring it because you've got the shear webs in the kit, which you can then use to position each rib as you build. You use this as a temporary means to do it. So what you're going to do, once you've put that sheet down with those lines on, you're going to put the lower D-box balsa on the plan. Just lean across and get that. So that will be put on the plan, pin it in position like that. Once that's pinned in position, you'll then get your quarter square balsa, and you'll position that and glue it to the balsa there, and then you put the trailing edge in there. So what I would do is I would pin this in position, glue the lower spar in position, put my trailing edge sheet here in position like that. You could also, if you wanted to, you could put the cap strips, the lower cap strips, in place at the same time. And to do that, because we're talking about 75mm spacing of the ribs, the cap strips are 10mm, so the spacing between the cap strips will be 65mm. So by all means, put a cap strip in, measure an offcut of balsa or whatever to measure 65mm spacing, and space all the cap ribs out, and then you can stick your ribs on top. You don't have to do that. Traditionally, you wouldn't necessarily do it that way. You'd stick the ribs in place, and then afterwards, when you've done all the top surface of the fuselage, which is the trailing edge, the D-box section, and the cap strips on the top, you'd turn the wing over and do the cap strips underneath. Entirely up to you. I will be building mine without the cap strips in place. I'll be building it as you see it here, and I'll probably start with the other wing rather than this is starboard wing. I'll probably start with the port wing. Now, before we start looking at the build, I think what I will do is introduce some of the glues that I am going to be using. Doesn't mean to say you've got to use exactly the same glues, it's just the ones that I have found over the years, the ones that suit my building needs. So first up, for most of the gluing on this, I'll be using a PVA wood glue, and I use Gorilla Glue white glue. Gorilla make a lot of products, most famous I think for the expanding brown glue. I'm not going to be using that on this build, but I do use it. So a lot of things, so for instance, sticking ribs down, sticking the sheeting over the wing, sticking leading edge on, the wing tips, gluing the fuselage sides together, I'll be using white PVA. And normally what I do, instead of pouring out of the cap here, the spout, I'll take the top off and pour some into a lid like this, and then apply it to the surfaces with either, this is an ice lolly stick, spread it on, or I'll use a brush to apply it. Now the advantage of using a brush is you can put nice thin layers of glue on. What you don't want to do is overdo the glue for two reasons. Glue will add weight, a surprising amount of weight. If you grab hold of a tube like this, which is a 1 litre tube, that's a heavy beast, that really is. All that glue, or the vast majority of it, weight-wise, is going to go into your model. Sure, some will evaporate, but a lot of it's going to go onto your model. So you want to keep the amount of glue down to a minimum. So using a brush comes in very, very handy. Another glue I will use if I need to have a glue that maybe expands slightly but dries quickly, rather than the Gorilla Glue brown, I will use this glue, which is the Lumberjack wood adhesive 5-minute glue, and it's an expanding glue like Gorilla Glue Brown, but it doesn't expand as much as Gorilla Glue Brown, and it's reasonably well priced as well. Sparing use on this build, I think. Limited use, maybe 1 or 2 areas, I don't know yet, but that's one of my favourite glues as well. If I want a quick set, quick grab, then yes, there's the good old Cyano CA adhesive. This one's super thin, this one's CA UK. It's good price, does the job incredibly well, but once again, use it in limited areas on the build, maybe helping me stick areas down that have got the white PVA on, so like a permanent type pin. But in conjunction with that, I also use these flexi spout, I hope you can see that, flexi spouts, disposable. They've got a very thin capillary tube on the end, and it makes sure you get a really small amount of glue in the right place. You can buy them in the likes of Amazon. I bought them. You can buy them in packets like that of goodness knows how many, which is absolutely great. Keep them by the worktop, and then you can quickly grab one and put them on your super glue. So that's my super glue. An alternative to super glue, because some people don't get on with the smell, although this is a fairly odorous one, and that's, by the way, that's the super thin one. An alternative to that, another one of my favourite glues, is super aliphatic. And superphatic glue is a very thin, like a very thin down PVA in terms of its look, but it's very, very thin, so it'll get in, it'll wick into the smallest of gaps, and it's useful for areas where, for instance, you've got the wing sheeting sticking down onto, say, the balsa leading edge, and when you've glued it and you unpin it, you find that you missed a bit of glue, there's a slight gap, there's a slight movement between the sheeting and the balsa. Squeeze some of that along there, press the 2 pieces together, it'll wick along there. Very, very quick setting. It's not instant like super glue is, but I mean, you're talking about minutes rather than hours for that set. Now, the disadvantage with this glue, more so than white PVA, is that it's difficult to sand. So if you get that on the surface of balsa and you try sanding it, it's a bit like sanding rubber. It's quite difficult. So apply it very sparingly. And again, it's another reason why, not just the weight, but why you should apply this sparingly. You don't want it to go onto the surface of the balsa too much. It makes it more difficult to sand. Not as bad, in my opinion, as superphatic, but it can be still a nuisance. And talking of sanding, that's a big, big problem when you're using super glue, Cyano, because it will spread. If it's super thin, it will spread and it can get to the surface of the balsa, and that will make that surface rock hard. So you can imagine if you're sanding along and you come to a rock hard piece, then your sanding down will end up with a ridge where the hard balsa is caused by that glue. So be careful how you use that. So they're the glues that I choose to use, and on this build it will mainly be, as I said, the Gorilla Glue White, the PVA. Now, tools for the job. Pins. We need pins. I like these pins here. These are super thin pointed. Don't know if I can get one in front of the camera there. They're very thin point on them, so tend not to split balsa. I use those a lot. Clamps, I will use clamps where necessary, and I've got a range of clamps going from these small clamps here. to these size clamps, and then to these type of clamps as well. So I will use all of those during a build. I don't know on this build yet if I will, quite possibly. Be careful with these are extremely powerful, so will crush balsa if you're not too careful. These are a lot more gentle, but because they've got they're made out of tin plate, you've got to be careful on the nose of those, because once again they can dent balsa. And again, goes without saying, these clamps here, they can easily crush balsa. When I use these clamps on a build, I usually put a piece of scrap balsa or ply between the jaws and the face of the material that's being clamped. Metal blocks which give me right angles. These are from my metalworking days, but they are extremely useful, so I can hold them up against ribs, or where I want something held perpendicular, vertical against a horizontal. These are absolutely great. Hold in position. You can get small set squares, metal set squares, they'll do the same thing. Engineering blocks will do the same thing. Extremely useful. And then I've got my rulers, along steel, all steel rulers, a long steel one, just over a metre long, additional 300mm, and a smaller one there. All very, very useful. I also keep on my building board, or near to it, is a cutting block here, which has got a lip on it, which I made. You can see there the lip. So I can hold pieces of balsa or ply against this and cut down here. Very useful to have to hand. Talking of cutting, good old scalpel. Have a range of blades because they go blunt fairly quickly. And the safest cuts are made with the sharpest blade. Why? Because you don't need to apply too much pressure. When we come to covering the model with film or laminating film, we'll get through a lot of these blades because that really does dull the blades. On cutting, I also use razor saws as well. Very, very useful, very thin blade. Really useful for cutting ply and getting close in to cutting square edges off. Moving on to finishing now. And here again I've got a range of tools. Good old Davy's razor plane, as the name implies. It's a plane with a razor blade inside, which is really useful for doing some rough cutting to shape. So say the leading edge of a wing. Initially start with that, and then finish off with sandpaper. Now, I also advocate using sanding bars. This is a good old Great Plains aluminium sanding bar. Doesn't have to be that, as long as you've got a straight edge. A lump of wood will be fine. A bit of angle iron, anything really that you can just stick sandpaper to. And the great thing is I can tear this off and stick another piece of sandpaper on there. And for free hand sanding, I use P240 grit, really nice and fine. That finishes balsa off really nicely. So they're the basic tools that I use for construction, and I will be using in this build. First things first, I'm going to position my D-box bottom sheeting, pin it in place along that line. Now make sure that the sheet isn't bending in the middle. I did when I was first built the SoarcerEee. I found that unfortunately one of the pieces of balsa that I was using actually did bow in the middle, and I didn't check it, so that when I came to look at the plane at the end, I had a slight bend in it. It wasn't a major problem, but it's just annoying. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to get is my 1/4 inch or 6.2 by 6.2 or thereabouts balsa. Let's just check it with the rib. That fits nicely. Yeah, again, the problem maybe with the kit is that because I've bought to supply to the builders already preformed square section balsa for the upper and lower spars, they may not be exactly square, so just double check those. My advice would be, if you've got a piece that's slightly rectangular rather than square, make sure that it fits to the sides and the bottom, and if necessary there's a slight gap on the top, which won't matter too much. It's better than being wobbly in the sides of the rib, because you want a good fit there. With that in place, what I'm going to do now is glue the lower spar to the sheeting. I'm gluing the lower spar in position here. I'm using these blocks just to make sure that it lines up with the back edge of the undersheeting, the leading edge undersheeting. And there we go. So the ribs are 3/32 for these two here, and the same for the other half obviously, and then 1/16 for the rest, just as a matter of interest. So you'd have to look on different sheets for the ribs, so it'll be on the same sheet that the fuselage side is in. And you'll notice with these ribs, when you get them, that you can just see here there's dotted line, and the reason for that is you can put the ribs in place here, and once dry cut out that middle bit, because that's where the dihedral brace, the ply dihedral brace, is going to go. You may need to, or you will need to, cut the ribs from the sheet, because there are tabs holding them in place. Not many, I think about maximum of 4 tabs per shape. So let's just cut these out. There we go. And that one there. Obviously we don't want to put them in place yet, because we need to position the trailing edge undersheet here. Now the measurement, there is a specific measurement to make it easier. So from the back edge of the spar on the back of the balsa D-box section, if you measure back 135 millimeters, if I can do this backwards, 135 mil from there to here, and that's where the back edge of the trailing edge goes. So if I just draw a line now, 135 to 135, just draw a line there. And obviously I'll be repeating all this on another sheet of tracing paper for the other half of the wing, as I said earlier. So next we want to get the strip wood here, which is 20 millimeters wide. That's the trailing edge sheeting, and we can pin that down in place, lining the back edge up with the line. So now we're in a position where we can start building the ribs out across here. Now this the second rib I should say, would go in place there, and it doesn't come exactly to the back of the sheeting because the top sheeting will go down to the top and you'll chamfer it or bevel it to join on to that there. That's fine. This is, you know, we can put that in dead upright, no problem at all, that one. But this rib needs to be angled slightly because of the dihedral, and included in the kit there is a piece of balsa which will give you the right angle for the root rib. So if I position that root rib down so that it's flush with the edge of the spar, and if I then use the angle guide, that will just kick that over, and that's now the correct angle for that. Obviously all of the other ribs are upright. What I'm going to do now is I'm just pinning through the rib where it goes onto the spar, not pinning down there. Now we use our shear web to line up our next rib, and we can use one at the front and one at the back. I'm going to get my next rib, and what this will do is it will allow me to just position it in, making sure that I'm getting it lined up and tight against there. Then I'll take that out. So again, so these are the 1/16 of an inch balsa ribs. Put it in a bit of an angle there so that I can then push it tight against the shear web. Again, pin the trailing edge in, remove that shear web, put that there. And this way, if you do it against the shear web, that rib is going to be vertical because all the shear web material has been cut on the laser. So it should be right. So if I just double check that, there, that's absolutely fine. And take that out, and now when I put that in later, that's going to be a nice snug fit. Don't have to fight. It's going to be a nice snug fit against the spars. So I'm going to continue that, and I'll come back when I've finished the wing. Well, not finished all the wing, putting all the ribs in. So here I'm just on the last rib. You see I started to use the brush instead of the stick to put the glue on. Basically you get a lot less glue going on. Making sure that one goes in square. Couple of pins. And there is one wing ready for the next stage. I've changed the camera lens to hopefully give a better picture of what I'm doing. So with the lower section glued, as I did in the last video, the ribs in place, the leading edge D-box undersheeting in place. Now is the time to fit the top spar, which obviously is 1/4 by 1/4 again, and I am this time utilising the brush to apply the glue, because otherwise that goes everywhere. Just a word about these first 2 ribs. We're actually going to cut out the mid portion of the ribs afterwards, so you don't need to put glue on top of it, just the sides of the ribs there, and make it easier to cut out. But obviously on the rest of the ribs, well, sorry, the 1, 2, 3 ribs, we're going to cut the centre bit out of the balsa. I've not perforated the 16th inch rib that needs to be cut at this moment in time, mainly because it would make it a little bit weak and it may break it when you take it out of the balsa sheet. But you can easily cut that out later, as we'll see. So that's the glue applied. So if I get my 1/4 inch section, I can let it overhang because I can trim that to suit later. There. So that's the upper spar fitted in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to repin the lower spar down, but I'm pinning it from behind. And the reason I'm doing that is because I also want to put the shear web balsa in place at this stage. So I'm just pinning diagonally through the lower spar into the building board. There, okay. So with that in place, as I said, what I want to do now is fit my web sheeting there, shear web. And once again, I can use my brush to apply the glue. You don't need to apply it to this first section here, or put a shear web in there, because the dihedral brace is going to go right up to this rib, so that'll be solid between the upper and lower spar member. So we only have to put the glue, also put the shear webs from the next bay outwards. But the good thing about these shear webs, because obviously they are vertical grained, you can bend them in to fit. And you'll see there, that there is a nice tight fit, which is what you want. You want it to butt up against the ribs to give a continuity of strength. So that was one of the reasons why I've pre-cut these and why we use them to position the ribs. You could put glue to the framework there instead. It's entirely up to you how you do it, but make sure that you've got plenty of glue on the mating surfaces. I'll come back when I finish those. With the shear web all glued in, and by the way, if you want to pin it in, by all means pin it to the spar, upper spar and lower spar. Mine are such a good tight fit that I see no need to do that. Anyway, the next thing to do is to put the trailing edge top sheeting on. Now, if you recall, I said earlier in the video about leaving a gap behind the trailing edge of the tip of the rib and the rear of the trailing edge, so that when the sheeting goes on, if we look at that, see if I can show it on camera here. When we look at the sheeting going on there, underneath there's the gap, and this sheeting has got to sit on top of the other sheeting. So what we need to do is to chamfer here a slight angle so that when it goes onto that lower sheet, it sits on there nicely. So I'm just going to use sandpaper on that, or sanding block I should say, just to take that edge off so it can sit down. You don't have to sand it away to nothing. You could do if you wanted to sand it away to nothing, coming let's say a few millimeters across there and chamfering it down. But at the end of the day, what we don't want a sharp trailing edge, we want a blunt one, but we don't want this to be pushed up by the sheet underneath. I don't know if I can pick that up on the camera. You can see there the chamfer on the end, and that's going to sit down now and meet with that bottom sheeting quite well there. So apply glue to that area. It's that whole of that back lip. Glue on the ribs here. There we go. And let's just apply this trailing edge top sheeting. Lining up the back edge. Now I'm going to pin through. And what I will do is I'll use my block to make sure the rear edges do line up and that I haven't got an overlap of one from the other. It's not the end of the world, but if we can avoid it, it's better. Because I really don't want there to be any gaps between the upper and lower surfaces of that, upper and lower sheets of the trailing edge. It's not the end of the world. You can get over that using superphatic glue like that. That will run into any gaps. A bit like super glue really, without the downsides of super glue. You may have noticed since the previous part of the video, when I put the lower section down, I've actually put some packing pieces, some 1/16 packing pieces underneath the ribs so that I can pin through the ribs. There, I just did that to help. Now the next thing and the last thing I want to do in this video, which will enable me to continue with the next bit, which is bringing the, because if you think about it, we've got a curve on our rib. The sheeting has got to go from the flat up there. We've stuck there, we need to bend it up, and we're going to have to raise that sheeting up there. But we need something to glue it to in between the ribs. It's a strip of 3/16, and obviously we can't just plant that on the end there because that will have a square end, and we want it to be beveled up a bit, because once again, if I can get that on camera, there's the rib. If we've just got a bit of square section against that, the bottom there, if I can see that, I need to sand that edge down before I put my sheeting on, which is going to be difficult if it's all as it is at the moment, to get a sanding block in between the sheeting and this strip. So I've pre-sanded this, just a slight bevel on the edge. Once again, I'll hold it up to the camera to see, which is the easiest way to see if you can see there, that bevel is on there, and that sheet, that's where the sheeting is going to stick to. So I'm going to put that now, glue it onto the front of the ribs like that, glue it on, and when that's dry I can then pull the sheeting up here onto the ribs and to this, in effect, a false leading edge. This is where I will glue to the front of the ribs. If I'm not careful, you'll see my balding patch. So as you can see, I'm actually using the leading edge D-box undersheeting to lift it up against the rib and against the strip that it'll be eventually glued into. I'm using that to help me position that strip. So I've continued, and that leading edge, or false leading edge strip, is pinned in place, glued in place. I'm going to let that dry overnight now, so that when I come back I can put the dihedral brace in, and I can put the top sheeting of the D-box in, as well as lifting this up. So the order of play will be: lift this sheet up, glue it to the ribs and the false leading edge, cut the holes out in the ribs between the spars, slide the dihedral brace in, then the top sheeting can go on the D-box. Then I can put the cap strips on all the way down the wing there, and that will complete the top surface of the wing, and I can then, once that's dry, lift it from the board. Well, that completes the first part of the build, namely the basic structure of the wing. The next video will be sheeting in the top of the wing and the capping of the wing and the underside and the centre section sheeting. And what I'll do is I'll build the other wing half off camera and then be able to bring the two wings together. So the next video should see the wing construction complete as well. So I hope you liked it, guys. If you did, please, you know what to do. Put a like down below, subscribe if you haven't, and see you on the next one. Cheers.